Let's get to the latest on the Israel-Hamas war, and for that we bring in Dr. Alon Burstein for the latest on the Israel-Hamas war and to get the latest analysis on this. This is what we're talking about up first here, Alon. Maybe it doesn't surprise you. The top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, addressed his colleagues on the floor today, making the case for a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. But the Jewish senator says for peace between the two to take place, we need to take a closer look at those that are in charge in Israel. Let's listen to a quick soundbite from Schumer earlier today.
It is clear that Israelis need to take stock of the situation and ask, must we change course? At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel, at a time when so many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of their government.
Okay, so Schumer says that an election should be held once the fighting dies down between Israel and Hamas. What would it take, Alon, to trigger such an election?
So there's a couple of different things to address here. First of all, in Israel's parliamentary system, such an election could happen theoretically if enough parties leave the government and vote to disband the Knesset. So, like, unlike the presidential system in the United States, in Israel, you can call a new election basically whenever you want if enough parties within the parliament decide that they want to do that. Another thing that could happen, though, and this is, some said, even a more likely scenario, although it's looking less and less likely as the war goes on, is, again, unlike in the presidential system, you can actually replace a prime minister without an election. Like, the way the parliamentary system works is you have a situation where you have in Israel 120 people who are elected to parliament. They can elect any prime minister they want if a majority of them wants that. But theoretically, the Likud could also say, we've had enough of Netanyahu, we'd like someone else. So that's the theoretical things of what would be required for that to happen. Enough people to leave the government and disperse the Knesset, or replacing Netanyahu internally. But really, this is a bombshell that was dropped by Chuck Schumer. And really, it's just the latest level in this ongoing escalation, diplomatic escalation between the U.S. administration and Israel's Netanyahu government. And really, I think one of the things that we have to pay attention to is it's, I would imagine, no coincidence that Chuck Schumer started his speech by saying, I'm a Jew, and my name comes from the idea of Schumer, which is Shomer, which is in Israel, Hebrew, guardian. I'm a guardian of Israel. I want to protect Israel. And more than that, underneath the pin of the American flag, he was wearing a pin for the hostages. He sees himself as operating for the good of Israel in terms of bringing the hostages back and what would be, as he considers, winning the war for Israel, and really brings to mind what Secretary of State Blinken said after his last visit to Israel, when he said that he is shocked to feel that he is more committed to the hostages than Netanyahu, and that he is shocked to realize that Netanyahu is putting politics ahead of returning the hostages. So really, we've seen this growing in the U.S. administration. We've seen the U.S. Democratic Party, and specifically Biden, but also, different leaders. Now we see Chuck Schumer, we saw Blinken before, really developing this idea that actually Netanyahu is not doing good for Israel as far as they're concerned, what's good for Israel. And really, this is just an ongoing escalation of rhetoric, and we're likely to see it more and more as we come closer to the election. Like, the administration is really fed up with where Netanyahu is taking the war.
If Bibi was to be put up for re-election right now, what would he be in for? What does the domestic popularity look like for him at this point?
So I'll say two things about that. One, the polls are very unfavorable for Netanyahu. His Likud party is polling anywhere between 15 to 20 seats. That is crashing down almost 50%. And his big rival, Benny Gantz, who is a part of the war cabinet, is polling anywhere between 30 and 40. So if the polls are correct, then Benny Gantz would be the next prime minister, sort of hands down. At the same time, it's important to note that Netanyahu, I always tell, I teach classes on Israel, I always tell my students, love him or hate him, he's a political wizard. He has come back from the dead, so to speak, politically so many times, such that to suggest that he would be dead politically, again, it's been suggested in 2019. It was suggested in the elections of 2020. In 2022, he was no longer prime minister, and that's it. His tenure is over. Here we are. So, it's very hard to know with the Israeli populace, because the Israeli populace, ultimately, a lot of issues are at stake. But bottom line, in the United States, they always say, it's the economy stupid. In Israel, it's the security stupid. It's the idea of what will keep Israel safe. And that's been heightened much more after October 7th. Netanyahu is very much seen as the person who was prime minister for, 16 out of the last 17 years. So it's very much seen that this happened on his watch and that he's responsible. But at the same time, he's extremely good at manipulating the situation and convincing the Israeli population that he is the one that can bring security, and it has been successful time and again. So right now, it looks like if elections were to happen, it would mean his downfall. But I don't put it past it. If elections happen in 6 months, he may come back victorious. You never know. What we can see, what we do know, is that the U.S. government seemingly has given up the notion, at least for now, that by sweet-talking Netanyahu, by the method of a carrot, they are going to manage to bring him back into the fold in terms of what the U.S. government considers would be the best thing for Israel, which is this regional deal with Saudi Arabia, Palestinian state, two-state solution. And so they're gradually moving to the stick. They're gradually moving to much more escalatory rhetoric. We saw the other day, it was stated that, Biden said that maybe Netanyahu is doing more harm for Israel than good. Now, actually calling for re-elections in Israel is just one-upping, and we're not done, in my opinion.
We remember Biden saying that Israel's offensive is over the top. It was kind of off-the-cuff statement he said. But how much weight does a figure like Schumer carry? Obviously, it caused a stir when Biden said that, but how much weight does the top Democrat in the Senate carry?
So, on the one hand, it carries a lot of weight because Netanyahu is always perceived as one of the people who's very big on the international scale. He speaks flawless English. He has been embraced by every president. He knows how to speak at the UN. Almost everyone remembers the pictures of him holding the pictures of the bomb with Iran, and he's very good diplomatically. And one of the things that he runs on in the campaign is his relationship with the United States. But really what we've seen what this is indicating in the sort of course of the relationship between Israel and the United States is the breakdown of the bipartisan alliance with Israel and the fact that Israel always wanted to maintain good relations with both the Democrat and the Republican Party. And this goes back 15 years. This goes back to the relationship between Netanyahu and Barack Obama. That relationship was the first time that an Israeli prime minister and a U.S. president seemingly just did not like each other, and at the same time also clashed on policy. And one of the things that happened leading up to the elections of Donald Trump the first time is that Netanyahu started to actually throw his weight into the Republican Party. He was invited to speak at the House against the wills of Barack Obama. He was invited then by the Republicans, and he did so. And this brought the support for Israel, sort of the blind support, the automatic support that the United States has always given Israel, more to a partisan issue, more to the Republican side. And that, it's not that the Democrats don't support Israel. Like I've stated many times, Biden has been probably the most supportive president of Israel that Israel's ever had. At the same time, the way it's perceived is the Republican Party is always supporting Israel, whereas the Democratic Party has some criticism. And one of the things we're seeing now is that, again, coming into an election year, this is coming to a fold. There's a lot of pressure in the Democratic Party to start restraining Israel, to maybe restrain the amount of weapons that are sent to Israel, the aid packages that are sent to Israel. You're not hearing that in the Republican Party. You're not seeing that. And this is really a symptom of something that's been growing over the years. I think Biden defied that in a lot of ways during the war. He sort of threw his full weight in support of Israel. Eventually, it's come to a head. And in Israel, this has a lot of meaning. It does matter. But more than that, it's sort of seen as an indication of the fact that in the United States there's not automatic support for Israel. Maybe there's one party, maybe there's another party, and that ends up being played by Netanyahu saying, vote for me because I'll bring the support back. So it's important. It's obviously not as important as when the president says so, but it's more an indication of this declining relationship between the Israeli administration and the U.S. administration, particularly now with the Democratic Party, but more generally, just the fact that the two administrations are not aligned is not good for Israel when it's out of war.
Chuck Schumer causing a bit of a stir today. Let's move on. There is other news to get to. Today, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas appointed a new prime minister of the Palestinian Authority. His name is Mohammed Mustafa, and Reuters says that he's one of the leading Palestinian business figures who has overseen Gaza reconstruction under Hamas Islamist rule. What do we know about Mustafa? Does his promotion give us any clues alone as to how the Palestinians want to move forward in a post-war scenario?
But Mohammed Mustafa is an interesting figure. On the one hand, historically, he's a figure that really shied away from any support for violence or insurrections from the Palestinian side. So in that sense, it's good news for Israel and for the West. He's a moderate in that sense. He's mostly an economist. In the past, he's a Palestinian politician. He's a member of the Fatah movement. In the past, he served as the Palestinian Minister of Economy. He's also the head of the Palestinian Investment Fund, and he has a lot of business connections. So in that sense, he's a good appointment in focusing on rebuilding the economy and rebuilding the devastation that has occurred in Gaza, if and when this government does have a foothold there. At the same time, it does not necessarily bode well for reconciliation within the Palestinian movement, which is really what the United States would like to see. The United States has put pressure on the Palestinian Authority to say, you need to stop sort of a crony government. You need to stop having just a corrupt government that is built of an old guard that only governs the West Bank and doesn't really care what happens in the Gaza Strip and really is only interested in corruption and in maintaining the peace so that they can stay in power, and instead revitalize organizations that can really also talk to the Palestinian population. Mohammed Mustafa is not necessarily the answer to that. He's not a charismatic figure. He's not seen as a hero in the Palestinian population. There are leaders who are heroes. He is not one of them. And more than that, he is not necessarily going to be accepted by the Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement. Now, sure, in the vision of Israel and the United States, that doesn't matter. Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement are not going to exist after the war is over, so it doesn't matter. But realistically speaking, whether we can say that those organizations are destroyed or not, I don't believe that there's a way to destroy them wholeheartedly. But whether we believe that they are destroyed or not, the fact is that they do have a lot of popular support in the Gaza Strip, and the idea that this person is going to come in and be the prime minister who's accepted both in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is a little bit far-fetched. I will say, though, this comes after 2 weeks ago, there was a summit meeting in Russia of the different Palestinian factions, and there they agreed to create this new technocratic government. They agreed it would be a unity government. They did not agree on who would be prime minister. So this is a bone of contention that it remains to be seen what Hamas has to say about it. But theoretically, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and other organizations all agreed that there needs to be a new government. So they agreed on the trajectory. If they agree on this persona, maybe we will see that he will have some facilitation in getting a foothold in Gaza, but that remains to be seen. It remains to be seen how the war ends, what is the situation in Gaza, and do these other factions accept him? None of those things are clear right now. So that still remains to be seen.
Let's move to the West Bank. The Associated Press reports that the Biden administration is imposing sanctions on 3 extremist Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank who are accused of harassing and attacking Palestinians to pressure them into leaving their land. The AP says Israel's government has reacted angrily to previous sanctions imposed against West Bank settlers alone. Why is the U.S. raising concerns about this in particular?
So I think this goes back to our first topic. This goes back to the fact that the United States has shown itself, again, under the Biden administration, has been unwavering in its support of Israel right now. And right now, on the surface level, Israel is seen as waging a war against Palestinian factions in the Gaza Strip. At the same time, you do have a belligerent occupation in the West Bank. You do have Israel dominating the lives of Palestinians in the West Bank. It's a very unpleasant life to be a Palestinian in the West Bank, to live under martial law under the Israeli army with no civil rights or liberties, no freedom of movement or freedom of speech, while Israeli settlers do enjoy that. And the Biden administration is trying to say that it is not, through these actions, is trying to say that it is not just supporting Israel blindly, that it's not turning a blind eye to Palestinians. It's trying to show, yes, we support Israel in the fight against Hamas, that it's a just war, that is an accurate war. It is right to fight in order to destroy Hamas. At the same time, we do not necessarily support Israel in their actions in the West Bank. In the West Bank, Palestinian settlements are seen as a violation of international law. We do not support that. We do not support situations where Israeli settlers carry out violent attacks against Palestinians, which happen very frequently, and they largely go unpunished for a variety of reasons that have to do with Israel's politics and also with Israel's security. They largely go unpunished. So with the Biden administration, the reason that this has all of a sudden started to come to the fold now, these attacks have been going on for years, that it's all of a sudden come to the fold now is this is a quote-unquote easy way to show we do not support, in general, violence against Palestinians. We support Israel's war against Hamas, but at the same time, we're going to punish Israel and punish Israelis for their abuse of Palestinians in the West Bank. So that is sort of the reasons, I think, why this came to the fold now. It's the way the Biden administration is trying to show that it supports Israel in its war, but is not turning a blind eye to Palestinians. Another thing that I'll also say that's important to note is since the war began, there has been vast escalations in settler attacks against Palestinians in the West Bank. So that's another reason that this is sort of going on at the same time. In the Gaza Strip, the war is happening. In the West Bank, there's been escalation of these attacks. So again, it's very sort of logical for the Biden administration to say, we support Israel in Gaza. We do not necessarily support Israel in the West Bank. That is what it's trying to show here.
One more thing I want to hit before we go. The Guardian reports that the U.S. and UK have called for a UN maritime inspectorate to do more to prevent Iranian missiles reaching Houthi-controlled ports in the west of Yemen. The calls come as yet another Houthi missile was launched off the southern city of Aden on Thursday, prompting the U.S. to respond by destroying 4 UAVs, as well as 1 surface-to-air missile in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. Alon, how much control does Iran actually have over the Houthis? Do the Houthis have any autonomy whatsoever, or does Iran call the shots for the most part?
So there's 2 aspects to the relationship between the Houthis and Iran. One is ideological. And ideologically, the Houthis are loyal to Iran. Iran is sort of the seed of the Shiite revolution. The Houthis are Shiites. They see themselves as loyal to Iran, and as much as Hezbollah sees itself as loyal to Iran ideologically. Ideologically, Iran, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is the leader of the Shiite world, and to large extents, he then can actually dictate what is our ideology, what is our broader message. Then there's the practical. On the practical level, the Houthis rely on Iran a hell of a lot. They rely on Iran for diplomatic support, they rely on Iran for economic support, and for military support. At the same time, they're their own people, and Iran could not necessarily rein in the Houthis even if they wanted to, because unlike Hezbollah in Lebanon, where there is a Lebanese government, even though it's very weak, there still is a Lebanese government, and Hezbollah still has its own local considerations. In Yemen, the Yemeni government is virtually non-existent. The Houthis control large parts of the territory, and for all intents and purposes, they are the government in those areas. So Iran can apply pressure, but technically, the Houthis can also say, no, we don't agree with your Iranian policy now. We're going to do A, B, and C. Iran would not have a lot to do about that. They could apply pressure. They could cut off military aid. They could cut off funding. But theoretically, if the Houthis went rogue, then Iran will not have a lot to do with it. So they do have a lot of influence, but they cannot flip a switch and at that moment stop Houthi attack. One more thing I'll say is one of the reasons I would argue that this is coming up now, that the UN must block Iranian missile supplies, is it was reported today in the Russian state media that the Houthis have managed to obtain hypersonic missiles. That is going to be a game changer if that is in fact the case. Now that report is a little bit sketchy. It's unclear if, in fact, it's something that has happened or may happen or is a threat that will happen. But if that happens, those are the same types of missiles that Russia is using to bombard Ukraine. That is a game changer in terms of the Houthis' ability to target Israel, the Houthis' ability to threaten maritime situations. So there's a reason that the world's all of a sudden saying, we need to start reining in the shipments of missiles to the Houthis.
I saw that report from the Russian state media, and it made me ask the question, well, what's the difference between the missiles in that report and the UAVs that we've been talking about lately? Can you give us some sort of idea? Because I myself have not seen a picture of one of these UAVs that we keep hearing about. What do these drones actually look like that the Houthis are using?
So the drones that the Houthis are using are, very much like the drones the United States uses. Those are regular, quote unquote, regular drones. They're unmanned vehicles. Some of them are, as small as some of the drones that you see kids playing with, and some of them are the size of small airplanes that can carry missiles and etc. The advantage that drones have over missiles is they're controllable. Literally, I don't want to make light of it, but literally you sit with a joystick and you're like, move here, move there. Okay, I see the ship going there. I see this happening. And that gives a lot of advantage in warfare. Hypersonic missiles, though, are slightly different. They are missiles that fly faster than the speed of sound. According to at least that report, the missiles that the Houthis have obtained, fly 8 times faster than the speed of sound. They are a hell of a lot harder to intercept. They can evade radar in a lot of circumstances. So that will just give the Houthis an advantage in their their military capabilities that we haven't seen yet. Now, does the U.S. have the ability to deal with these missiles? Yes, but it requires a lot more money. It requires a lot more advanced warships. It requires a lot more activity. Does Israel have the ability to intercept these missiles? Yes, but again, if Israel's managed thus far to intercept every missile that the Houthis have sent towards Israel, now they may manage to intercept, if this is the case, 50% or 70% of the missiles. But that's a game changer when it comes to your ability to impact the government, change the course of a war, do things like that. Again, I will say that that report in the Russian state media only quoted Russian sources. It said that Russian military experts have said that the Houthis have managed to do this. They didn't even quote anyone in Yemen or Iran. It's very sketchy right now. But if that were to happen, we'll talk again, because it's going to be a game changer.
Time will tell if that report has any teeth. For now, we'll leave it there, Alon. Take care, and we always look forward to your daily YouTube uploads.
Thank you. Have a good day.